Hi everyone, welcome to the Blazor WebAssembly cookie authentication series. Okay, this is the first part of the series. In this video, we are going to authenticate our Blazor WebAssembly application with the .NET cookie without using any frameworks like Microsoft Identity .NET Core or the Identity Server 4. Okay, we are simply use the .NET Core cookie for authenticating the user. So in the next part of the series, we are going to implement external login providers like Twitter, Google, and Facebook, Microsoft, etc. Okay, so this is a simple diagrammatic representation of how cookie-based authentication works. Okay, here you can see API project and Blazor WebAssembly project. Okay, where API is the project that runs at the server and Blazor WebAssembly is the project that runs in the user browser. Okay, whenever a user requested with a login request to the API with valid credentials, then on success, API will return a authentication cookie. Okay, so that cookie will be carried out for every API request to make that request as user as authenticated user. Okay, here is the small user table that I am going to use for my authentication. Okay, like email, first name, last name, password, and external login name. Okay, so just a sample table, and here you can see for the demo purpose, I am saving the password directly as it is. But in the real application, we should hash it. Okay. Now, as a first step, let's create a API project. Here I am using .NET CLI for creating the project. So the command is like .NET new web API -o and name of your project. Okay, let's create my project. Okay, project is successfully created. Let me open my project. So here is my .NET 6 web API project. Okay, to communicate with the database, I am going to use the NT framework code. So let's install required packages into my application. So the first package I want to install, that is Microsoft.NT framework core. Okay, copy the command, install the package. The second package I am going to install is Microsoft.NT framework core.SQL server. Install it. Okay, now let's create a class for our user table. Create a folder like data. Inside of it, create a folder like entities. Okay, inside of entities, add a class like user.cs. Into this user class, let's add our table columns as properties. Okay, this is our user class. Now let's create database context. Okay, inside of the data folder, let me create a database context like cookie auth context. Okay, to make this context class as a database context class, it should inherit DB context. Okay, now create the constructor and define DB context options. And give our class name as its type, options, and pass it to the base class. Now register the user class here. Okay, to do that we can use DB set and its type should be our user class. Okay, so that is our database context class. Now we have to define a constant string for our database context. So we will do it in app settings.development.json. Here we can add default property like connection string. Inside of it, let me create a new property like key auth connection. Okay. So you add your connection string here. After adding connection string in program.cs file, let's define our database context class. Add db context, and here we have to define our class type. Use SQL server. Okay. Import the namespace, and here we have to pass our connection string. To do that, builder.configurations.get connection string. Here pass our connection string property name. Okay. So that's all about registering our database context. Okay, next create our controller, AuthController, and where we are going to define an action method for user login, where on successful login, we are going to create a authenticated cookie. Okay, add a new controller like AuthController. Into our controller constructor, let's inject our context class. Okay. Now, before creating login action method, first let's create a model, that is login model. Okay, let's create a new folder like DTOs and create a class like login DTO. To this class, let's add properties like email and password. Okay, now let's add our action method, that is HTTP post method, and we name it as login async. Okay. Okay, this is my method. Its input parameter is login DTO type. Okay, and let's decorate our method with HTTP post. Okay, and let me also add a route for it like login. Okay, as a first step, let's fetch the user information from the database. Okay, where user equal to await auth cookie context dot user email, compare with our payload email. Okay, and next we have to compare the password. For demo purpose, I have stored raw password as it is, but you should always hash the password while storing, and comparing also we should hash the password, and that hashed password must be compared. But the demo purpose I am using password, which is strictly not recommended. Okay. Along with this, I want to check one more, that is external, and I have missed one more column here in the user, that is external login name. Means here I am going to store, if it is external login like Google, Facebook, I will store those names. For this demo, we are simply storing .NET cookie, right? Which is not an external one, so it will be null. So what I will do here, I will check for external cookie also. So that with this comparison, what we are making, same email can have direct account in our database, or it can have a same email with another account for Google, or same email with another account for Facebook, like that, based on your business requirement. Okay, we can implement. If you want to unique for one email, then we no need to consider this column while fetching the user. Okay. Okay, fetches the user data. For suppose with those credentials, if you don't have user data, we simply return as a bad request. Like message like invalid credentials. Okay. And if the user is valid, then we have to prepare the claims. So where claims equal to define list of claims. So the claim collection here we are defining will be added into our authentication cookie. So in these claims, I want to store just user ID and the email address. Okay. So claim, I will name it like user ID. I will store user.id.to string, and I will store email claim. So there is some default claim type names. Okay. Like email, user dot, our user should be awaited. Okay. And now we can call email property. So that's my claim collection. Next, I want to create a claims identity. Okay, where claims identity object. Let's define the object. New claims identity. And first parameter, I want to pass this object, that is collection of claims, so that we have just created. Okay. And second claim is the name of the authentication. Okay. So here I am using simple cookie based authentication, right? Cookie. Okay. And authentication scheme. This is nothing but a constant which names cookies. Okay. So that is like that we have to create the claims identity object. And for now, let's create a auth properties. Let's as in a authentication properties object. Okay. For now, let's define the empty object. Okay. Now we can use framework default method for signing in the user. Okay. So to do that, await HTTP context sign in. Okay. By default, .NET Framework supports the cookie-based authentication. We don't need any additional frameworks like Microsoft Identity Core like that. Okay. So first parameter will be the name of the authentication. So same name what we have defined here. Copy that and assign it here. Okay. And second, we have to initialize claims principal. To that claims principal, I need to pass the claims identity. Okay. And third property will be our auth properties. Okay. So that's it. So this signing method creates the authenticated cookie by adding the claims into that cookie. Okay. Finally, simply return the success message. Okay. This is our login endpoint for the user. Okay. Now let's create another project that is Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay. Okay. Here is my comment for creating the Blazor WebAssembly application that is .NET New Blazor WASM-O cookie. Sorry, -o name of your project. So let me create the Blazor WebAssembly project. Okay, project is created successfully. Let me open in the Visual Studio Code Editor. So here is our .NET 6 Blazor WebAssembly application. Let's create a one more pages component that is login.razor. Okay, let's define route like /login with page director. Okay, now let's add here small HTML form. Okay, that contains email and password text boxes. Here I have small form snippet. Okay, where I have two text boxes. One is for email and another is for password and a button for submitting the form. Okay. Now to enable model binding with this form, we need to create a model. For that, in our Blazor WebAssembly application, create a folder like models. Inside of it, let's create a model like login model. Okay, this is our login model. Let's add properties like email and password. Now let's add this namespace into the underscore imports dot global file so that we can use the classes very easily into the component. Okay, using this namespace. Okay, now let's add a C# code in this Razor component inside of the code block. Okay, let me initialize our model, login model. Okay, so initialize our login model. Okay, now let's enable the two-way binding with this form. To do that, we can use @bind attribute. To that, I can pass my login model properties. Okay, like this. @bind password. Okay, let's create a click method also. So on clicking the button, we have to invoke a method. Inside that method, we have to invoke the login API call. Okay, so let me create a method like okay, this is my method. I want to invoke on clicking the submit button. So here I can register for @onClick method with my user login method. Now in this user login method, we have to invoke API, right? So let's create a logic files where we are going to implement all our API calls. Okay. For that, in the Blazor WebAssembly application, let's create a folder like logics. Inside of it, let's create a class file like API logic.cs. Okay. Okay. Now in the underscore imports.razor page, let's add this newly created namespace as well. Okay. Now in this API logic, let's inject the HTTP client factory. Okay. Okay. To use HTTP client factory, we need to install Microsoft.extensions.http NuGet package. So into our Blazor WebAssembly application, let's install the Microsoft.extensions.http NuGet package. Copy that. Go to Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay. Install it. Now try to import the HTTP client factory namespace. See, now it is recognized HTTP client factory. Let's implement the logic for invoking the our login API. So let's create a method for invoking the login API. So this method will have login model as a input. So it must be sent as a payload to the server, right? And next, first we need to get the HTTP client factory. Okay. So we need to create a HTTP client object from the client factory. To do that, first we need to register our domain in the program.cs file of the Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay. So here, what I will do, builder.services.add HTTP client factory. Here I am going to use named client technique. There are 4 different types of technique. In that named client technique, we are going to create the HTTP client instance based on the name registered in the program.cs file. So here I will give name like API. You can give any name. Okay. And options dot base address equal to new URI. And here we need to register our server URL. So what is my server URL? You go to our API project. Inside of the API project, go to properties and go for launch settings.json. Okay. Here, copy the HTTPS URL. Okay. And go to our Blazor WebAssembly application. Register here. Okay. Now I can create a HTTP client instance from the HTTP client factory using this name. Okay, so that HTTP client object will be generated with the configurations we declared here. Okay, so here now what I will do, HTTP client factory dot create client. To this client we need to pass the name of our registration. Okay, API. Okay, now we will get the HTTP client object. Now string payload. We need to format the serialize the payload. Okay. For that, JSON serializer. Okay. System.text.json. Serialize our login model. Okay. Now where content equal to new string content. Okay. Pass payload as first parameter and encoding dot UTF-8 format, and here we can specify payload is application/JSON type. Okay. Now what we can do, we can invoke the API call. So response equal to await client dot post async. Okay. Our request is login request is what? HTTP post method only, right? HTTP post, and our path will be auth/login, our server endpoint. So same endpoint defined here because origin domain will be available in the client object because we are using the named client. Okay. So define the path auth/login. Okay. And next part we have to pass our content. Okay. So if response dot is success status code means API call or login is successful, then we will return success. Okay. And else I will return some message like failed. Okay. So this is my uh, API logic, API invocation logic. Okay. Now let's create an interface for it like IAPI logic. So in this interface, let's define the method definition. Okay. Now in the program.cs file, let's register this services API logic and IAPI logic for scope level. Okay. And let's inherit that IAPI logic here. Okay. Now go to our login component at the top. Let's inject it. Okay. Now here in this method, let's implement the logic for invoking the API call. API call returning some success or failure message, right? So message equal to await API logic login async, and here we need to pass our login model. Okay. If message equal to successful success, then we need to implement something. If it is failed, we need to show some error message. Okay. Now let's run our Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay. And also when we are running our Blazor WebAssembly application, our API also should run. So first let's run our API project. Okay, my API project is up and running. Now let's run the Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay, before going to test our login form, I have forgot few configurations in my API project. Okay, let's implement them. So in the API project, I need to register the authentication middleware and also cookie service, auth cookie service. So go to program.cs file in the API project. Okay. Here, let me register my cookie service. Okay. Services dot add authentication. Here we need to specify the name of our authentication. So name of the authentication here we have already used, right? So let's copy that cookie authentication default authentication scheme. Okay. Paste it over here and import the namespace dot add cookie. Okay. That's the registration of our cookie service. Next, just above the use authorization, let's register our middleware, that is use authentication middleware. Okay. Okay. Now, if I go to my, this is my Blazor WebAssembly application that runs under browser, right? Here I don't have a link for clicking the login page. So here on the menu top, let's create a link for login page. Okay. So for that, go to our Blazor WebAssembly application. Let me create one shared component in the shared folder. I will name it like login display.razor component. Okay. So for now here, let me add simple anchor tag. href equal to /login and login. Now let's import this shared component into menu layout after this anchor tag. Okay. Login display component. Okay, now rerun the Blazor WebAssembly application. Now here you can see the login link. Click on login link. We have login form. So let's open the developer tools to check the network calls. Okay. So I will give my registered user. Okay. Valid credentials I am giving. And here see, we got error. What is the error? Course issue. That is because our API project runs under localhost 7105 and our Blazor WebAssembly application runs under 7246. That means they are technically different domains. So in our API project, we should allow or implement course origin service. Okay, let's implement the cross origin service into our API project. So in the program.cs file, let's register course service. Okay, add course and options. Options dot add policy. We can define number of policies here. Okay, so this is my policy name. Course specs. Here I am going to allow any header, any method, any origin, but you can specify specific origins only in real project. Okay, so this is my service registration. So let's register the middleware here. So just above the authentication middleware, app dot use course and specify the policy name. So what is the name I have given? Course spec. Okay, now my API project will allow or can be consumed by any kind of other application. Okay, so let's rerun the API project. And one more small correction. In API project, for user entity is the table entity, right? So make them more specific, like nullable column, string, right? So from C#, this feature is available. So make them, they can accept nullable, okay? Based on your DB column. If your string column is not nullable, you no need to give. But my all columns are nullable, so I am giving this as well, okay? Now rerun the API project. Okay, now reload our Blazor WebAssembly page, inspect elements, okay, and give the credentials and check the developer tool. See, here is our login API call. Let's wait for the result. So it is successful. So here in the response, you can see success message, and in the cookies, you can observe a.asp.net cookie. So this is a authentication cookie, okay? That was successfully written as a response, okay? Now get back to our API project, Blazor WebAssembly project. Once the user is authenticated, what you have to do, okay? So it is a client application, right? So the Blazor WebAssembly, to make it is application is authenticated, something like in the header, if we have to hide login and show logout button, and next to it some user name, like that we have to show. Means we have to fetch some user information from the authentication process. But from the cookie, it is bad to read the cookie, okay? And we cannot read also, because authentication cookie always HTTP only cookie. HTTP only cookie means cannot be read by the scripting frameworks, okay? And it is also not ideal to read the cookie for the authentication as well. So what is the best idea? After successfully login, we need to call some API. That API will give some user information, like a profile API. So after login, if we invoke that profile API, we can get some user information like email, name, right? So we can use that information and make our Blazor WebAssembly application as a authenticated app. Now in API projects, let's create the endpoint like profile, where we will get the user information as a response in that API. Okay. So first let's create a model. So that model will be the response model of our profile API. Okay. So let's create a model like user profile DTO in our API project. Okay. Let's add the response model properties of the user profile DTO. Okay. Response model. Let's go to AuthController. Okay. And this API, let's add a method like user profile async. Okay. This method should be a HTTP GET. Okay. And define a route like user profile. Okay. And it should be decorated with authorize. Okay. Only authorized users can access this endpoint. Okay. And now what I will do, so for every API request, our authenticated cookie will be passed to the request, right? So we can read the claim. So what I will do, I want to read the user ID from the claim. Okay, so we are added user ID as a claim, right, to that cookie. So now I want to read it from the cookie now. So once the user is successfully authenticated with the cookie, our API project automatically reads the user information and it's stored into the HTTP context. Okay. And from the claims, I want to read the user ID claim. So dot type equal to, so name of the claim here, what I give user ID, right? User ID. So dot select. So I want to convert that value into integer. Okay. So dot value I want to read. Okay. So dot first. So once I got user ID, I'm going to query my DB. Okay. So where user profile equal to await my cookie context user where user ID equal to our user ID and select, and let's map all the data into our user profile DTO. Dot first default async, and finally return that user profile response. Okay, so we are ready with the user profile API. Now we should invoke once the user is authenticated with our Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay, how to consume it in our Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay, let's understand it, how to implement it. After successful login, I must call user profile API, and the data should be binded here as a authenticated user information. So what we think, whether we can store it in a variable, okay, and register that variable means where we will create a property like user profile DTO in Blazor WebAssembly also, and that class will be registered as a scope and our singleton, and we want to maintain the state. Okay, but that is not the ideal case. Okay, so another way of doing is Blazor WebAssembly itself supports some authorization where we can add claims for authentication. So my plan is now I want to add my user profile data as a claims to the authenticate state provider. Okay, so Blazor WebAssembly for authorization means to make WebAssembly authentication, it should use authenticate state provider. Okay, so to customize that authenticate state provider, we must implement it. Okay, so for implementing the authenticate state provider and integrating the authorization into the Blazor WebAssembly application, we need to install one NuGet package. Okay, so first let's install that package. The package we have to install into our Blazor WebAssembly application is Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Components.Blazor WebAssembly Authentication. Okay, let's copy that. So let's install the package. After installing package, we have to import few namespaces. So go to underscore imports.razor page, okay, and import namespaces like Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authorization and at the rate using Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Components.Authorization. Okay, these two namespaces must be implemented, and we have to register services like go to program.cs5 and register services like builders.services.add options. Okay, and next builder.services.add authorization code. Okay, these two services need to be registered. Now let's implement our custom authentication state provider. Okay, so to do that, let's create a new folder. So let's create a folder like providers. Inside of it, let's create a class like custom auth state provider.cs. Okay, to make it authentication state provider, we must inherit authentication state provider. So that imports from namespace Microsoft.ASP.NETCore.component.authorization, which is the library we have just installed. Okay. So on inheriting authentication state provider, there is a abstract method which we need to implement. Okay. So that is get authentication state method. So it returns authentication state. So this is the state that contains authenticated user information. Okay. So implicitly our authentication state provider or Blazor WebAssembly application calls this method to get the authentication state provider. Okay. So to make our Blazor WebAssembly application authenticated, what we will do, we will invoke our profile API, okay, and that response we will add as a claims and return from here as a authentication state provider. Okay, so now what I will do, I will declare a variable or initialize a variable like client's principal. Okay, client's principal, and it should take identity, client's identity. Okay, so what I will do here from this method, I will initialize new authentication state provider authentication state, and it is expecting client's principal as an object. Okay, and so currently it is empty, right? Our client's identity, that means user is not authenticated. Okay, so now what we have to do, let's register this namespace into our imports. So where is our imports file? Here, and next we are implemented, right, authentication state provider. It must be registered in the scope level in the program.cs file. So here we need to register it, builder.services.add scope. Okay, and authentication state provider, and then our custom auth state provider. Okay, we need to register like this. Once we implemented authentication state provider, and to inject this authentication state into our Blazor application in App.razor page. Okay, this is the entry component of our Blazor application. Okay, so what we have to do, we have to implement the cascading authentication state property. Okay, because of this, okay, by encapsulating everything under this component, it will pass a cascading property like authentication state property. So Blazor components can read that property and can understand whether a user is authenticated or not. Okay, so we have to add that, and along with that, let's change this route view to authorize route view. Okay, so those are the changes we required. Okay, and now let's implement our uh, user profile API logic into our API logic file in the Blazor WebAssembly. Okay, go to API logics. Here, let's implement a new method for getting the user profile information. So before creating the user profile method, let's create the response type. What is the response type of our user profile? User profile DTO, right? Exactly same model we have to create in our Blazor WebAssembly as well. Okay. So in the models, I will create a class like user profile model. So this is our user profile model, right? Let's copy the properties from our API project. Okay. So now let's go to our API logic class. Let's create a new class for invoking the profile API. So let's create a HTTP client instance. For that, let's copy this line. Okay. We will get the HTTP client instance. And next, we are going to do response equal to await client dot get async. Okay. And here we need to pass our profile API. So what is our profile endpoint path? The profile, right? Copy it from our API project and define it here. Okay. So if response.isStatus code means if response is successful. So here I want to return a message as well as the response object as well. So for that I will use a tuple here. Okay, string message and user profile model. So user profile. Okay, so if it is successful, I will simply return success as a message and the response. So to read the response, response dot content dot read from JSON async. Okay, which is the extension of system.net.http JSON. Okay, and here you can specify your type. If status is not success, so in that case, else in the else we will check for a specific condition like response dot status code equal to http status code dot unauthorized. Okay, means user is not a non-authenticated user trying to access the API. At that time, we'll simply return like unauthorized. Okay, and we'll return null. If at all any other exception, we will return like failed and return null as a response. Okay, so that is our logic for invoking the user profile API. So let's define this method name into high profile logic. Okay, so we have implemented logic as well. So where we want to invoke this API call. So let's go to login.razor. So after successful login, we have to call, right? So instead of directly calling at the login.razor page, I want to refresh the page. Okay. While refreshing, I want to call the API object, API information. Okay. So what is the use of calling at the API information? User profile at the reloading of the page. The benefit is if the user closes our application or user reloads our Blazor WebAssembly application, at the time our authentication state will be lost. Till now we haven't set any authentication state, but it will be lost when we reload the page or when we close application and we come after some time and open the page, state will be lost. But actually we are logged in, but state will be lost. So that is why it is better to call the user profile information on every page reload. Okay. So before writing that logic, I need to write a one method here, okay, so that on successful response API logic, wherever we call our user profile async, once that is success, when you get the response, we have to update that response into our authentication state, right? So to do that, I want to write a method here so that our authentication state gets updated. Okay. So to do that, what I will do, I will write a method like set auth info. Okay. To this method, our user profile model passed as a input parameter. Okay. I will store the response as a claims. Okay. And that claims I will create as a new claims principal object, and I will assign that object to this variable. So this variable is used by our authentication state provider, right? So it gets updated. So what I will do, I will create a new claims identity. Okay. Claims identity, and here I want to pass array of claims. So new claim, I want to pass the email as one of the claim that will come from our email, right? Sorry, our user profile information, right? I will use that. And one more thing, I will write like claim type like name. So using first name, last name, I am going to frame the name. Okay. So user profile dot first name space user profile dot last name. I am framing the name claim here. And next I want to store ID as well, user ID. So user ID, custom claim name, and user profile dot user ID dot toString. Okay. Here we have initialized collection of identity. And here one more thing, here we need to specify the authentication type. You have to give some name. Okay. Otherwise, it won't reflect in authentication state. Okay. So I will give like cookie auth. Any name, it is fine. Okay. Next, I want to assign it to this variable. Claims principal, new claim principal identity. Okay. So assigning like this, we are changing the claims data, means making the user authenticated. We are adding some custom data, some user information as a claims. But to refresh this authentication state, we have to use one notification method, that is notification authentication state change. So this will reflect the authentication state change. Wherever we use authentication state provider property, cascading property in components, that gets refreshed. So to this method, we have to pass our get authenticate async method as the input parameter. So now come back to our case where to call our user profile API. I want to call at page reload, right? So how I can do means go to App.razor page. Here on every navigation, OnNavigateAsync method will be invoked. Okay, here route component is there, right? So on this, there is a method like OnNavigateAsync. Okay, this gets executed for every route, Okay, so so on page reload also it's get invoked. So at that time I want to invoke my API call. Okay, so for that let's create a method private async task. I will give same name for my method. Can give any name. I am giving same name. Okay, and it's going to receive navigation context. Okay, so here I want to invoke my API call. So to invoke the API call, we have to inject our IAPI logic. Okay, at the rate inject API logic, API logic. Okay, so register this method here to this event at the rate prefix with at the rate. Okay, and here what I can do, where response equal to await. Okay, API logic dot user profile async method. Okay, so if response message equal to success, okay, API call is success means that means user is authenticated and we got data. In that case, we need to pass our user profile response to this set auth info method in the custom auth state provider. So to invoke that into our App.razor component, we must inject the authentication state provider. Okay, auth state provider, because it is inheriting, right? This is the base class. That's why we have to inject it. But it is the default from the framework. But how we can call, since it is injected, we can typecast and call this method. Okay. So now what I will do, authentication state provider as custom auth state provider. Okay, I am converting it because I cannot inject custom state provider as a into the component because it is inheriting the authentication state provider. So we need to inject the authentication state provider only. We cannot inject the custom state provider. So now we can call set auth info and response dot user profile. I am passing it. Okay. So if it is not successful, okay, something like if it is unauthorized, then we have to add some logic here. Okay. So once the state is updated, we want to show logout button and username in the menu, right? For that, what we will do, go to login display component. Okay. We going to change this component. Okay. So now I have enabled or installed the Blazor WebAssembly authentication library, right? So I have a default component like authorize view. Okay. So this contains two child components that are like authorized. Okay. Content inside of this will gets rendered when user is authenticated. Means authentication state provider contains the user information at that time. And another component that is not authenticated. So okay, sorry, not authenticated, not authorized. Okay. So this will content will be displayed when the user is not authenticated. Okay. Now here at the rate anchor tag I will use href nothing. Here I want to display the profile name. So to read the data from the auth state provider into the authorized view component, we can use context dot. This is only work for the authorized view component. Okay. Context dot user dot identity. Okay. Identity dot name. So here I want to display the name of the authenticated user. And next I want to add the button. Okay. Of type button class. Now let's add some bootstrap. Okay. On clicking this button, I want to implement the logout functionality, which we will implement in upcoming steps. Not presently, it is not yet completed logout API. So let's leave like this. And in the not authorized content, let's add our previous href link, that is login. Okay. So href equal to / login. Okay. Okay. Now let's rerun our Blazor WebAssembly application and test the authentication. Okay. Let's go to our application and it's reloaded. Okay. And I want to refresh immediately once the user is authenticated, right? So what I will do in the Blazor WebAssembly application to refresh the page once the user is successfully authenticated, go to login.razor. Okay. Here at the rate inject navigation manager. Okay. Inject the navigation manager. So using this navigation manager, navigate to, okay, is not synchronous. Okay, navigate to home page once it is authenticated. But I want to refresh and go to home page. For that, I can force reload by passing boolean value true here. Okay, so let's save our application and run the Blazor server application. Now, once I successfully logged in, API is successful. I am automatically redirected to home page by reloading the page. Okay. Networks. Let's clear all the existing calls and call the API. Let's wait. Let's wait. See, page is reloaded. Redirected to landing page. Okay. But here we didn't get any authenticated values. User profile is not authenticated. See, I am getting 404 unauthorized, but login is successful. Cookie is added, but user is not authenticated because cookie is not transferring along with the request. Okay. In the request header, do you see any cookie? No, right? That is because by since our domains are different, right? Our Blazor WebAssembly application and server application domains are different. So credentials automatically will not be attached. We should make them attached. So to do that, we have to write a HTTP delegate handler. Okay. So implement the HTTP delegate handler first. So in the Blazor WebAssembly application, create a new folder like handlers. Okay. And create a file like cookie handler. Okay. To implement delegate handler, we have to implement delegate handler. Okay. And inside of it, we have to override so this is the method we have to override. If you want, you can go to the definition. So this is the sending method we are overriding. Okay. If you have any doubt, you just copy from here. Method name and those things. Okay. And give it over here. Okay. So inside of it, what we have to do means, so what will happen means, whenever API call invoked, this delegate handler is registered for that API domain. Before going to server, it will bypass here, means it will, this method gets executed. Whatever logic we added, that's going to affect the API request. Okay. So inside of it, what we'll do, request dot set browser request credentials. So from this you can understand authenticated cookie means is a credentials. So browser it will store in browser, right? We are requesting to add the authenticated cookies of that domain, API domain. Okay. Browser credentials dot include. Okay. Next return. This means resume to invoke the API. So here what we are doing while bypassing before going to API, just we are informing the request. Please do add the credentials from the browser for this domain if there are anything in the browser. So we will have a cookie, right? Login cookie. That cookie will be attached. Okay, and this should be registered. The program.cs file. Okay. So in the program.cs file, builder.service dot add scope. Okay. Here we need to register like this instance, and then we have to add here as a delegate handler. So message handler, and we need to pass our delegate handler. Okay. So any domain, any API request of this domain will automatically intercepted by this delegate handler. Okay. So save our Blazor server application and rerun the application. Now if I go to, it is reloading. Okay. See, in the network call, still it is unauthorized 404. Okay. Let me refresh again. Page. A page reload user profile is calling, but that is unauthorized. But we in the request header now we can see cookie is added, right? User information cookie is added, but we are getting error. What is the response? 404. And if you go to console, here you can see still server is not allowing because credentials are including. Means if we go to our API project, okay, program.cs, here we have to specify allow the credentials as well. Okay. So to do that, hello credentials. But when you use credentials, now if you run the application will fail because it won't accept the allow or any origin. So we should not use this. What we have to use means set origins allowed and default assign boolean true so that it will allow any origin. Okay, but don't use allow any origin directly when you use allow credentials. Okay, you should use set origin allowed, then only it will work. Okay, so save it and rerun the API project. Okay, refresh our Blazor WebAssembly application. See, profile is now that cross origin issue is gone, but still profile is unauthenticated. Why? Maybe cookie has expired. Let's log in again. Login not working. Go to Blazor WebAssembly application. Login display component. Okay, it is href. Okay. Rerun the project. Okay, page is refreshed. So click on login, enter credentials. Okay. Networks clear here. So login. API call invoked. See, it is refreshed. And now see, my data is populated and logout button is displaying. Means I have successfully authenticated Blazor WebAssembly also by adding my custom claims into it by customizing the authentication state provided. Okay. So if I refresh also, I still get user information. State is not lost because on reload or on every navigation, I am calling this API call. But there is a drawback here. So if I click on counter, see again user API call is called, profile API call. If I go to home again, one more call. That is because, okay, that is because App.razor OnNavigate method executes for every route navigation, whether it is a paid reload or normal Blazor single page navigation also, this method get executed. So here we need to add some conditions so that it cannot be invoked unwantedly. Okay. So how we can implement conditions? For suppose if the authentication state provider contains login data, we no need to call user profile, right? We no need to call user profile. So let's fetch the user profile information. So here to fetch the user generally in any component, okay, you want to get the cascading authentication state provider. For example, in the code side, if I want authenticated user information, I can use cascading property. Okay, authentication state provider. Okay, this like this cascading parameter. Why this is a cascading parameter? Because on top, the root component is cascading authentication state provider. It has a input parameter that is auth state, authentication state. Okay, to read this authentication state. Okay, to read this authentication state, we should use cascading property because it is a parent component property, and from this authentication state we can get the user information. But that is after executing the app.razor, right? So like this I cannot use in app.razor. If I use also it won't work because after this component app.browser component and inside we have navigation, right? here in this component, we don't have access to this authentication state provider because inside of this only it is executing. So we cannot use this property like this. But what we can do, we can inject or use our custom authentication state provider here directly. So for that, what we will do, see, only call, let's go to custom authentication provider. I am going to consume this method here in this program.cs file in the app.razor. So only for App.razor only call this method. Remaining wherever you want, you have to use the property I have just shown, right? This property you should use. You cannot call this method directly, okay? You can use, but that is a wrong way of implementation. Okay, don't use like that. So since here I don't have a scope to access the property, I am directly consuming the custom authentication state provider method. So here I need to, I have already injected authentication state provider. Okay, now what I can do, where user equal to this property conversion dot get async. Okay, from this I want user. You can get user. Okay, like this. So I will get the user information. Now what I can do, if user dot is identity dot is authenticated. Authenticate, whenever it is authenticated, we no need to invoke the profile API, right? So if not authentic, okay, sorry, this condition won't stop execution of API call. Okay, condition we cannot avoid the unwanted call, right? So what we can do, what we will do, once the user is successfully logged in, go to login display, go login Azure component. Here, I want to set a variable into the local browser storage. So to do that, I need to install a one more library, okay, to usually communicate with the local browser storage from Blazor WebAssembly. We need to install one more NuGet package because user information here we fetched, right? This alone can't prevent the unwanted API calls. Along with this, we need to have one persisted data value that represents user is already authenticated, but user information is not available. At that time only, we need to call this API. So for that, let's first store that variable. To store that variable, we need to install one library. Okay, let me install Blazored local storage. This library must be installed into our Blazor WebAssembly. So it will help to save the data into the browser local storage. Okay, so install it. Install it. Once the library is installed, go to imports.razor and here we need to call the namespace like local storage. Okay, and we need to register the service also in the program.cs file. Services dot add Blazored local storage. Okay, and now go to our login.razor component. Here inject iLocal storage service that comes from the NuGet package just we have installed. Okay, and here on successful login, we will store some variable, any variable. Okay, that represent user is authenticated. Local storage dot set. So key value pair, right, is authenticated. Okay, I will store some boolean value. Value will be doesn't matter here for me. Okay, so once the user is successfully authenticated, this variable is available in the local storage, right? So what we can do in in App.razor, let's inject local storage, okay. So here we will try to get the value like auth value variable, okay. Await underscore local storage get item string async, and we need to pass the key. So what is my key? This is my key. Store the key here. Okay, now condition what I can write means if string.auth variable exists means local storage we have saved user is authenticated means that is successfully authenticated. Okay, string dot is null or empty, and our user dot identity is not authenticated. See here, I am applying reverse condition, not authenticated. But browser storage contains user is authenticated, but our state is not updated. Okay, this happens when user is logged in, page reloads, state doesn't exist, right? Means a user API call is doesn't call. At that time, it will be false only. At that time only, we want to invoke the API. Cut this and keep it inside. Okay, now when this is user profile API calls, when the browser local storage contains variable like is authenticated, it's only available when the user is logged in successfully. Okay, and our state is empty. At that time only you call user profile. So user profile response updates the state again, right? And in the else, if the API is not what I say, if API got some exception or it is expired, cookie is expired, but our local storage variable will be available, right? At that time, cookie might expire and user profile got unauthorized. At that time, we have to remove local storage variable so that we can again avoid the unwanted calls. Okay, here in the else, we have to remove the local storage variable. So copy this line and change the method to remove. Okay. Okay, now rerun our Blazor server application and test whether we are able to avoid the unwanted profile API calls. Page reloaded, cookie expired seems okay. Now login. Page is reloading. Okay, now I got authenticated user information. So if I navigate between the pages, okay, if I navigate, go to networks, clear the, if I navigate, see, user profile is not calling. That is because we have successfully handled. Or suppose if I reload page and I want to show the local storage value as well. In the applications, we go to local storage, see is authenticated is saved, right? Variable is successfully saved. If I reload, network call C, user profile is called. Because once we reload, authentication state will be lost. Okay. And if I navigate between the routes, it is not invoking. So perfectly, we have avoided the unwanted user profile calls. Now let's implement the logout information. So logout means clearing the cookie, right? So for that, first let's implement the logout endpoint in our API. Okay. So let's create a action method like LogoutAsync in my API project. Okay. I want this should be HTTP post. Okay, and route logout. Okay. Here we simply use await HTTP context sign in we have used for authentication, right? HTTP context sign out. There is another method. Sign in for login, sign out for logout. Okay. You can log out and simply return okay. Okay, that is my API method. So rerun the API project. Now we have to invoke the logout API from our Blazor WebAssembly application. Go to our API logic file. So let's implement a method for invoking the logout API call. Okay, so it will clear the cookie at the server. Okay, let's copy the line. And I want to invoke as a post, right? So response equal to await client dot post async at a post. So first will be the parameter path of our logout. Okay. So this is my path of my API. And here content, there is no content. I can simply pass null. There is no payload for this. Okay. If response dot is status code success, then I will simply return success. Means that the logout is successful. Else I can simply return failed. Okay. That is my method to invoke the logout API. So let's define the definition, method definition. Okay. So our logout, where we have our logout is in LoginDisplay component. So go over there. Now we have to create a method private async task logout. Okay. This method must be invoked here on click of the button. Okay. So hello, first we have to invoke the API call, right? So inject API call. Inject IE API logic. Okay. Here what I can do, await API logic dot logout async. Okay, this will clear the cookie at the server. Response equal to. Okay. Then if response equal to success, when API successfully removed the authentication cookie, then we simply remove, okay, browser local storage variable auth, and we just refresh the page. That's it. Logout session on the page also removed. Okay. So at the rate inject local storage service local storage. Okay. So here what I will do, I will remove the local storage variable, remove item. So the name, remove item. And I want to reload the page. So for that, I can use @inject navigation manager. Okay, underscore navigation manager dot wait, sorry, navigate to. I want to go to home page. I want to reload. For that, I want to force it. True. That's it. Our page, our Blazor WebAssembly application also lost its state for authentication. Okay, let's rerun the application. Okay, here we can see login, right? So let's click on logout button. And also you can see this local storage variable as well. Okay, here is our logout. So if I click on logout, okay, it is logged out successfully. And go to network calls. Logout is 200 and go to application. There is no local storage variable. And here you can see no login. And you can see on no login also profile API call will not invoke. You go to networks, no profile API call. No profile API call because we are handling there. Whenever we have local storage, at that time only we are trying to invoke the profile API call. Okay, so that's it. Blazor WebAssembly authentication with cookie-based authentication, how we have to implement. Okay, one last time, let's log in. Successfully logged in, you can navigate to any page, okay, and log out. It is successfully logged out, okay. Hi everyone, welcome to Blazor WebAssembly Cookie Authentication series. So in the first video, we have implemented Blazor WebAssembly authentication using .NETCore cookie. Okay, authentication with the .NETCore cookie. So it is a continuation part. In this video, we are going to authenticate our Blazor WebAssembly application with the cookie, but using the Facebook credentials. Okay. So if you haven't watched my first video, please watch the first video because lot of content or coding has been used from that video. Okay. So here is our Blazor WebAssembly application running, and here is our login. Okay, now what we are going to do, we are going to add a small Facebook link here. So on clicking it, we are allowing our users to log in into our Blazor WebAssembly application using the Facebook credentials. Okay, so now first go to our API project. Okay, so in API project we have to install Facebook authentication NuGet library. Okay, first let's install that NuGet. So library we have to install is Microsoft.ASP.NETCore.authentication.Facebook. Okay, since I am using .NET CLA, I am going to copy from here. If you are using Visual Studio, then copy it from the package manager. Okay, copy the command, install the authentication, Facebook authentication NuGet. And to enable Facebook authentication, we have to register our API project. Okay, make sure to register our API project, not Blazor WebAssembly application. We have to register our API project with Facebook. Okay, so such like Facebook developer, in that you can click on Facebook for developers. Okay, so log in with your normal Facebook credentials. Once logged in, go to my apps. Okay, here you can see create app. Click on create app button. Okay, Here you can see type like consumer. Okay. And click on next button. And now give name to your application. Any name you can give. I'm giving like .NET 6 API. Okay. And click on create app. Okay. So it is asking authentication. Give your Facebook password. Okay. Now you can see a dashboard like this, and your application name can be seen in this dropdown. Now click on setup button on Facebook login. Means we are trying to set up the Facebook login. Okay. Click. Okay. Under Facebook login, go to settings. And here we need to configure our valid OAuth redirect URL. Okay. This is nothing but, so since we need to register our API, right? Copy the API domain. Okay. This is my API domain. Slash. Okay. And redirect URL will be sign in -Facebook. So this is the default redirect URL. Okay. Save it. And click on save changes. Okay. Now go to the settings. Under the basic, you can see app ID and app secret. So we have to configure these values into our API project. Okay. Now go to API project and go to app settings.development.json, and let's create configurations for Facebook settings. Okay. Facebook settings, and I need app ID, app secret. So we get them from Facebook dashboard. So copy the app ID and paste it over here. And next, click on show and copy the application secret ID. Okay. Now let's register the Facebook authentication service in the program.cs file. So now to this add cookie service, we can extend our Facebook service as well. Okay. Like add Facebook. Okay. And here we need to register our Facebook ID and secret. Not register, we should load here. Okay. So fb.app ID, fb.app secret. Okay, we need to load them from our configuration. So to get them from our configurations, builder.configuration.get section. Okay, and copy the root setting name. Okay, dot get value of type string, and of which property we want value, that property name should be passed. I want app ID. So pass it here. Similarly, we have to read app secret as well. So copy the app secret property name, paste over here. So that is the basic configuration for registering the Facebook authentication service. Okay. Now we have to implement our logic into our controller, AuthController, for invoking the Facebook authentication. Okay. So for that, go to our AuthController. Okay, these are the action methods for normal .NET Core cookie login, which we have discussed in video 1. Okay. Now let me create a action method like public action result Facebook login. Okay, and it should be a HTTP GET, and let's configure route as well. Okay, and this is my login action method for invoking the Facebook. So here I should have a input parameter like return URL. So this return URL nothing but my Blazor server application, because once the API is successfully authenticated, I need to redirect back to my Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay. Now we have to use challenge. So this method used for invoking the external login providers. Okay. So to this method, you can pass authentication properties. Inside of this authentication properties, I can specify a redirect URL. So I will not specify redirect URL directly this return URL. I need to map it to the one more action method. Okay, that I am going to create in next step. Okay, URL dot action. For now, let's do empty. Okay, and we have to pass one more parameter, the type of authentication we want to invoke. So we have to pass the name here for this challenge method. So Facebook defaults. Okay, put the namespace dot authentication scheme. Okay, this is nothing but a constant Facebook. Okay, so what we will do, we will assign this action method URL in our Blazor WebAssembly application. Whenever that URL is invoked, we are going to invoke our API. Inside of our API, we are calling the Facebook. Okay. So once Facebook authentication, everything is successful, then it is going to redirect another URL, that is nothing but another action method in our controller. So let's create one more action method. Async task action return Facebook login. So this method will be like callback method. Okay. So in this method, we are going to again pass our Blazor URL. How it will come also I will explain. Okay. Return URL. Okay. So we are passing this URL here as well. Okay. Nothing but our Blazor WebAssembly application URL. Okay. And now once the authentication is successful, we have to check in this method because this is a callback method, right? So first we need to check the status of our Facebook authentication. For that, authentication result equal to await using HTTP context dot okay authentication state async. Okay. To this method, we have to pass the type of authentication we are checking for. I am checking Facebook defaults dot authentication schema. Okay. So from this, I can now understand that authentication is success or not. Okay, succeeded or not. If Facebook authentication is success, okay, in that case, so if the Facebook authentication is success, what we have to do? If the user is first time, then we have to store the user into the database. If user is not first time, based on the Facebook credentials, sorry, Facebook created claims, we have to create a new user into our database so that we can use those that user information to create our cookie. Okay. So now here one thing we have to remember is from here Facebook API will be called on success based on this redirect URL. Facebook URL will redirect us to this action method. Okay, that means Facebook will says if it is authenticated successfully, it will create a cookie, login cookie, default cookie that which we cannot control, and also it will update the HTTP context with the authenticated user information. Means already here we will get one cookie that was created by default by the .NET framework on receiving a success rate from the Facebook. So what we will do, we are going to use the user claims initially that are prepared by the Facebook. Okay, we are going to create new user into our database. Okay, then we are going to use the data which we saved in our database as a user information, and we are going to create new cookie. We are going to delete the automatically created cookie and we will create new cookie, and we also update the HTTP context as well. Okay, so let's correctly. The first thing is I want to uh, update user information if it is not exist, and later I want to return the user information. Okay, so for that let me create a one common method. So this common method will be used by Facebook authentication, Google authentication, Twitter authentication, and Microsoft authentication in all our upcoming videos. Okay, so we are going to create a common code. So my method is like private, I think, task, and finally I want to receive user information from this method. Okay, so I will name this method like manage external login user. Okay, this is my method name. So I want to finally I want to return the user information. So this method will have input parameters like email, first name, last name, and external login name. That means whether it is Facebook, Google, or Twitter or Microsoft. Okay, simple string only we will pass this. Okay, now what we will do, first we will check whether user is already created, means user already logged in with our Facebook, then credential will be available in our database, right? So if they are available, we need to fetch from our database. So user equal to await auth context dot user dot where. First let's compare with email dot lower equal to email dot to lower. Okay, and along with the email we don't have password, right, for external logins. Next parameter I want to check external login type, because here I want same email can be authenticated with the Facebook, Google, means I will consider as different accounts. If you want to make a single email, you can do that as well. Okay, but here considering I am email and external login name will be unique in the combination I am taking. Okay, so here I'm going to check for the user with the email and the Facebook external name in the database. Okay, and finally master default async. So if the data exists, means user already saved into the database, we simply return it from this method. Okay, return user. Okay, if user not exist, then we have to create the new user into our database. So new user equal to new user. Okay, and let's prepare the data. So we are using the Facebook claims to save into our database. Okay, Okay, those are the things I want to register user into my database. So after saving the data, we just want to return the new user. Anyway, this method should return a user information as the output. Okay, that is the role of this method. Okay, so let's call this method here. So first, I want to prepare some input parameters like string email, right? So HTTP context user dot claims dot, okay, where type claim type equal to claim types dot email. Okay, then select value. It will give my value. Okay, next string dot first name equal to HTTP context. So copy this, but here I want name. Okay, next I want string dot last name equal to HTTP context dot, copy this line, and last name will be the surname. Okay, and now okay, now we can invoke the get the user information from the manage external login method. So I can pass email, first name, last name, and finally I can specify directly it is a Facebook authentication. Okay, now I got the user. So now what I have said here, by default user get authenticated, created cookie, default cookie, and added claims. Those are taken from directly from the Facebook, but we want our own cookie, right? So we are generally depends upon the user ID to display the profile. We go to profile endpoint, we want user ID. So user ID, so cookie is created before user ID. So we cannot use that cookie. So for that we need to refresh the cookie. Refresh the cookie is nothing but sign out the existing cookie and signing with a new cookie. So for that what we can do means create one more, okay, one more private method. So this method also used by all our external login providers in the upcoming videos and in this video as well. Okay, async task refresh external login. Okay, so this method will take user as a first input parameter. Okay, now what I can do, I just copy my login code logic. Okay, most of the logic will be same. Okay, copy that logic, paste it over here. Okay, so this part of line is fine, and here is also fine. Everything is fine, but here we will write few more additional codes. First, we are going to update the current HTTP context. Okay, to do that, I can do user dot add identity. So here I am preparing a new claims, right? New claims identity with my user information from my database. So currently up to this line, current context is based on the Facebook cookie. So now I am overriding it now. Okay, claims identity. And next, I want to delete the cookie that was created by the Facebook default Facebook cookie by our .NET framework. So to delete that, we know method HTTP context dot http context dot signout async. Okay, and again re-signing. That means we are creating a new cookie with our data that was stored in our database. Okay, so we have to use this method. So here, once we got the user information, I can call refresh login, okay, user, and it should be awaited. Okay, and this is also awaited. Okay, so that's it. Up to here, we successfully creating our login cookie with our database. Now finally, I have to redirect, right? So here, what I will do, redirect and redirect. So here, my query parameter is return URL is nothing but Blazor WebAssembly application, right? So it will redirect there. But I will not redirect as it is. What I will do, I will add a one more query parameter to this return URL. Why that URL? Return URL, you can understand when we jump into our Blazor WebAssembly application. So here I will just add a query parameter like external auth true. Okay. And here what I will do, if the Facebook authentication is not succeeded, then I simply, then also I will redirect to Blazor WebAssembly, but I will send a flag like external authentication equal to false. Okay. Okay. So that's it. That's our logic for, so that's it. That's our logic for Facebook authentication in API. Okay. Here finally we need to update our callback right here that I forgot. So name of my callback method. So what is my callback method? Facebook login callback, comma, I can pass query parameter. So query parameter is nothing but for this action method. So what I will pass, I simply pass this return URL. Okay. So whenever Facebook authentication needed, first this endpoint invokes. Okay. In this endpoint, we use a challenge, right? So this challenge based on the specified external authentication provider, it will display that external login provider. So here it is a Facebook, right? It will show Facebook login. So once Facebook is successfully user is logged in, then it will redirect back to here. So here what we are doing, if that is a new user, we are creating the user into the database. If that is not new user, we are fetching the user information and we are removing the default cookie that was created by the framework with the help of Facebook, and we are updating our own cookie. So all the logic is available in the external login method. So finally what we are doing, if it is everything success, we are redirecting to the Blazor WebAssembly URL with a extra query parameter true. If it is failed Facebook authentication, we were passing like a flag like external auth. So this query parameter is not only for to know whether it is success or not, it also has some role in our Blazor WebAssembly so that we will understand. Okay. So far so good. API changes are done. Now get back to our Blazor WebAssembly application. Go to login component. Okay, login.razor page. So here what I will do, I will add one more button here under this. Okay. Okay, here I have added Facebook link. So to this href, I need to add my API link. Okay. So for that, what I will do, href equal to what is my API URL? This is my API URL, right? Okay. And what is path for my Facebook authentication? Facebook login under the auth controller, right? So slash auth /Facebook, and I have to pass return URL as a query parameter. So this is nothing but my Blazor WebAssembly URL, right? So Blazor WebAssembly URL I can pass the landing page. Okay, that's it. Here on clicking this, it's going to invoke our API. Okay, on successful, it return back to our home page of our Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay, so now if you try, so now along with this, we need to do one more change. Go to, if you recall our first video, once user is logged in, we are storing is authenticated local storage variable. Okay, this is all going through by API calls. What is this? This is normal form authentication, which is a in which we are going to create a ASP.NET Core cookie directly, okay, without any external. So this is the API call, right? So we are going to create successfully local storage. But Facebook, we don't have control. How we can create this local storage when the user is authenticated with the Facebook? So for that, what we will do in App.razor, okay, in App.razor, here we are going to check the condition like if string dot is null or empty auth. If variable is not found in the local storage, obviously if the Facebook user is authenticated, this will be empty, obviously, because we cannot create that local storage in the login page. Okay, and here what I'm going to do means context dot path dot to lower dot contains. Okay, what it contains? It contains this query parameter. What is external auth equal to 2? We are going to check for this query parameter. Okay, that means it is redirected from the external login provider. So what we are doing? We are checking auth variable. Obviously, it will be empty, and we will checking the route. So if route contains external auth true, then what we are going to do means auth equal to, we will pass just true string, and here we are going to set the value. So for next time, if we don't have external URL also, we know whether that is authenticated or not based on the local storage variable. So what I can do from the login display component, copy this line of code and paste it here. Okay. So for normal form authentication, Blazor form authentication, this variable is created here. Copied wrong one. This one, set authentication. Okay. So normal form, in the form itself, we are setting the variable. For external logins, we are setting the local storage variable based on the query parameter. Okay. So that's it. Those are the changes we need. Now let's run our API and Blazor WebAssembly application and test our Facebook authentication. Okay. And one small change here, make this method as private. Okay. One thing you have to make that method private, refresh login, and here also I haven't configured route and HTTP request method. These should be mandatory for the controller. Okay. Book login callback. Okay. Now rerun my API. And one more small correction here. In the callback method, I have mentioned like return. So it should be written this parameter value should be matched. Okay, then only callback gets executed successfully. So here also we need to change the spelling. Okay, now rerun the API project. So now click on the Facebook link. You can see Facebook login page. enter your credentials. See, you can see my authenticated name and logout button, and here you can see external auth equal to true query parameter. That means our callback has successfully executed, and in the local storage you can see the variable gets created. Okay, so same way you can log out. Okay, same way you can log in again with the Facebook. Okay, so see, it is successfully logged in because Facebook I have already logged in, right, in the first request. That is why next time you are not seeing the login page. If you log out to your Facebook account, it will again pops up. Log out. Okay, now log in again. Click on Facebook. Again it asks. Okay, if you already log in into your browser and already once log in with your Facebook page, then it will automatically redirect. If you want to see the Facebook login page, you must log out Facebook from your browser as well. Okay, so don't confuse why it is working like that in this case. Okay, if I click login, again I am redirecting back. I am getting my information. Hi everyone, welcome to Blazor WebAssembly Cookie Authentication series. So today we are going to discuss about Twitter authentication for our Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay, so let's jump into enabling the Twitter authentication. So here is our API project. Now we have to install a Twitter NuGet package to enabling the Twitter authentication in our API project. Okay. Install Microsoft.ASP.NETCore.authentication.Twitter into our API project. Copy the command. Okay, after installing the NuGet, let's register our API project into the Twitter developer dashboard. Okay. Okay, search like Twitter developer and click on the developer portal. Okay, here you can see developer portal, right? Click on it. Okay, since I have already logged in, I have directly navigated to the dashboard page. Okay, here you can observe you need to create a project first. Okay, so give any name. I will give like .NET 6. Okay, click on next and I will select like teaching and I will give same description, anything you can give, and now project is set up. So inside of the project, we can create a number of applications. Okay, so my app environment for the demo, I can select development environment. Okay, click on next. Here I have to specify the app name. Okay, so I will specify like .NET 6 API. Okay, so here you can see keys and token. So let's copy the API key and API secret because we have to configure them into our API project. Okay, so please copy them. They are one time. We can copy. If you want to copy again, the keys will be regenerated. Okay, so one time only key. Copy them for now. So for now, I will paste them on the notepad. So this is ID and this is secret key. Okay, secret key. Next, I am going to add them into my API project. Okay, now click on app settings. Okay, now you can see here. Here is our project name. Inside of the project, you can see apps. So if you want, if you have any doubt, you can see here menu also. .NET 6 is a project. Inside of it, API. We can create a number of projects inside, sorry, apps inside of that project. Okay. So if you scroll down, here you can see authentication not set up, right? So we need to set up the authentication setup now. So please select OAuth 2.0 configuration and OAuth 1.0 also. But basically, this NuGet package, Microsoft only is currently supporting 1.0 only. Okay. And next, select like web app. Okay. And here, one more thing we have to remember: request email from users. Please enable it. If you don't enable it, whenever we authenticate with the Twitter, in the authentication claims, we won't see the email claim. Okay. So if you want email claim, you need to ask this permission. Okay. I will leave app permissions only read. Okay. Here you need to specify the callback URL. Okay. So let me go to my API project and let's copy the domain name. So my domain name is this one, API project URL. Okay. In the callback URL, I can specify, and path is like sign in hyphen Twitter. So this path is default path. Okay. It should be like that only. And here it is expecting few more required fields like website URL, terms and services. So actually it won't accept normal localhost URL. Okay. If I paste my localhost URL, invalid URL only it will show. Okay. So for that, what we can do means, okay, here double quote, remove it. Okay. Now callback URL is valid. And here website URL field doesn't accept the localhost URL. So without giving some proper domain, we cannot save. So for that, what I did, I have created a sample domain with the blogspot or WordPress. You can create, right? I have created with blogspot. It's a sample original domain. Okay. So these are all the domains I have created. Like this, you can create for learning purpose. So I will use this blogspot domain because they are free to create, right? Sorry, not here. Here. And I have created two pages here, one for terms and conditions and one for principles. These are dummy pages, empty pages. Just for sake of registration, I have created. Okay, to fulfill uh, our learning for the Twitter authentication. Okay. So here what we did, we enabled OAuth 2.0, 1.0 and selected web app, type of app and requested email user and callback redirect URL. You have to specify our API domain and sign in Twitter is a default uh, redirect path. Okay. So remaining are like we have added some dummy domains. Now save it. Okay. That's it. We have successfully registered our API project into the Twitter dashboard. Now let's add Twitter settings into my API project. So go to appsettings.development.json. Here add Twitter settings. Okay. It contains like API key and then API secret. Okay. So we have just saved them to Notepad, right? So we will use them. So copy this API key, copy this secret key. Okay. Now let's register the Twitter service in the program.cs file. Okay, go to program.cs file. So here we can add Twitter. Okay, it gives Twitter setting for us. So consumer key and t dot consumer secret. Okay, along with this, we need to configure one more setting like t dot retrieve all details. Okay, to true. So what is this Boolean property means? If you hover here, you can see enable the retrieval user details during the authentication process, including email address. Okay, if you want email address or some user information, this must be enabled. Mainly, if you want email address, this should be true. Okay, and now here we need to bring our settings from the app settings. For that, let's copy this line of code. Okay, so paste it over here for API key and secret, and app setting.json, copy Twitter settings. Okay, replace with this setting. Okay, and next API key, API key, API secret, API secret. Okay, so that's about the Twitter registration service. Okay, now let's create an action method into our auth controller for Twitter login. Okay, so here public action result Twitter login. Okay, this is my action method, and we know that our action method contains external action methods will contain a input parameter like return URL. So this return URL will be our Blazor WebAssembly URL. So it will be a HTTP GET request, and I will assign route like Twitter login. Okay. So here, if let's copy code from our Facebook controller, which we did in video 2. Okay. So let's copy this line of code to make our video short. So we know that for external logins, we will use challenge method. So from this challenge, they can redirect to external providers login page. Okay. And here I have to specify the authentication. So this is not Facebook authentication, right? So Twitter default. Okay. Default, I think. Yes. Twitter default dot authentication scheme. This is just a constant. See, constant Twitter. Okay. And next, we have to change the callback method. So we know that callback method means once this challenge navigate us to Twitter login page. If the user is successfully logged in with Twitter, then Twitter redirect us to the action method that's we are going to specify here. Okay. So let's create one more callback method here. So public async ask action result Twitter login callback. Okay. So this is my callback action method, and it is also contains input parameter return URL because here we are passing, right? So because ultimately after success, we need to redirect back to our Blazor URL. So it should be HTTP GET only, and let me define some route Twitter login callback. Okay. So this is my action method. So now what I will do, I will copy Facebook callback method because most of the code is similar only. Okay. So let's copy this code from here from Facebook callback. Okay. And paste it over here. So let's modify here. So first we need to check whether the authentication with the Twitter is success or not. For that, here we should specify Twitter defaults. Okay. So this line of code gives us information with whether Twitter authentication is successful or not. Okay. If that is successful, we are getting claims from the authentication. So whenever once from the Twitter login page redirects back to our API project, right? So at that time, our framework will create a cookie. So that cookie we cannot control. It will create authentication cookie and claims will be added. Those claims are taken from the Twitter. So whenever our request entered to this callback method, already authentication cookie is ready, so that we can get the authenticated claims from the HTTP context. But these are claims that are directly taken from the Twitter. Okay, so here we're getting like Twitter. Better take given name, not name. Okay, and surname as my claims from the Twitter cookie claims. Okay, so next what I am doing, I am simply calling manage external login user. So this method is a common method for this entire series for external login providers. Okay, and I will change only this one external login name, which is Twitter. Okay, so let's go through this method also briefly. So here simply with the help of email and external login type like Facebook or Twitter. Okay, we're trying to search the user. If user exists, we will directly return. If user not exist, we will insert them into our database because we need to have user information, right? So we will save them and finally we return the created user. So that is the responsibility of this manage external logins method. Okay, and so using those claims, we are going to create your Twitter user into our database if the user is login first time. Okay. Next, refresh in the external login. I have mentioned right on entering to this method, cookie is already created by the .NET Core, so our API only based on the Twitter claims, right? But I want to claim like user which we are created here. New, if it is new user will be created, right? I want to store that ID into the my authentication cookie. Like that, I want to uh, control my authentication cookie. So what I will do, I am refreshing the authentication cookie. Refreshing is nothing but just I am I am signing out the user. So I am signing out the user with the existing cookie, which is .NET Core automatically created when it is entered into my callback method. But I am again creating a new cookie with the user claims that are stored in my database. Okay, so that is refreshing external login cookie. Okay, so that method is called here finally. And if everything is good, then we are redirecting to my Blazor WebAssembly application with external true. That means authentication is successful. If your Twitter authentication is not successful, here I am redirected to Blazor WebAssembly application again, but external auth is false. Okay, so like this we have to specify, and here let's give our callback method name. Okay, that's it. We are done with implementing the Twitter authentication login in our controller. Okay, let's jump into our Blazor WebAssembly application and add Twitter authentication link over there. Okay, so for that, so go to login.razor page. Okay, here we have already added Facebook link right in previous video. Now let's add Twitter authentication as well. Copy this entire thing. Okay, name it like Twitter. Okay, let's change the path here. Okay, copy from our controller. What is path? Twitter login. Okay, and in the query return URL, we are using our Blazor WebAssembly domain. Okay, so now let's run both our API and Blazor WebAssembly applications. Okay, here is our Blazor WebAssembly. Click on login page. Here we got Twitter link. So click on it. See here, Now it is asking Twitter login page. So let's give my username and password and click on sign in. See, it is redirecting for the application back. See, I got my Twitter username and successfully logged in. So let's check all the claims what we will get in the profile API. If I reload in the profile API response, see, email and first name are getting from the Twitter. And now let's check in the database whether the user is created or not. Okay, here you can see my email and Twitter username has been added into my user table in the database. That means we have successfully registered the user into our table as well. Hi everyone, welcome to Blazor WebAssembly Cookie Authentication series. So this is the fourth video of this series. In this video, we are going to enable the Microsoft Authentication to our Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay, so let's jump into our code. Okay, this is our API project. So first we have to install the NuGet for enabling the Microsoft authentication. Okay, let's install Microsoft.ASP.NETCore.authentication.Microsoft account into our API project. Copy command, install the command. Okay, after installing the package, we have to register our API endpoint into the Microsoft. So Microsoft, we can use Azure Portal for registering the apps. Okay, so go to Azure Portal. So once you logged in on your home page, you can see here app registration. Click on the app registrations. Okay, and now here we can register our application. Click on new registration. So give name for our app registration. I will name it like, okay. And here I am going to select the third option where you can have organization and personal accounts as well. Okay. And at the bottom, you can select web. And here we have to provide our API domain slash, okay, sign in Microsoft. That is a default path. Okay. Let's assign the redirect URL here. In the log setting, copy the domain of our API and default redirection path for Microsoft authentication is sign in Microsoft. Okay, this is the default path. Now register the application. Okay, here is the application ID we are going to use in our application. Okay, and so what I will do, let's register the Microsoft settings into my app settings.development.json. Okay, here let's create a settings like, okay, and client ID, we are going to copy this one. Okay, and next thing we have to add is client secret. Okay, so client secret we won't find here, we have to create it explicitly. For that, go to certificates and secrets on left hand side, and here you can create the client secret. So click on new client secret and give some description. Okay, and add it. So here you can see the client secret value. Don't copy ID value. Okay, we have to copy the value, and it is one time copy. So please make sure to copy. If you want another time, it will regenerate. Okay, So assign it here. So we have successfully registered our API into Azure Portal, and we have also generated the client ID and the client secret. Okay. Now let's register the Microsoft Authentication Service in the program.cs file. Okay. Just like Facebook and Twitter, we need to register the Microsoft account service also. Okay. Client ID, client secret. Okay. Now copy this line of code for fetching the settings, and let's change the appropriate setting names. Okay. Microsoft settings, Twitter. Okay. And client ID. Okay. Client secret. Okay, now let's jump into our AuthController and let's add our action methods for the Microsoft authentication. Okay, so to make it quick, what I will do, lot of the logic is common for all the external providers. So let's copy this method. Okay, I will change it to Microsoft account login. Okay, and this return URL will be our Blazor WebAssembly return URL. And let's change this method also, Microsoft dot account login is my path. Okay, and we know that method is for calling the external provide login page. Okay, and here we are giving some callback method, right? So let's remove the callback method, this one we will implement new one, and let's change the authentication name also. So Microsoft account defaults, okay, dot authentication scheme. Okay, so whenever we invoke this endpoint, this challenge method will invoke the external login page, like Microsoft login page, Outlook page. Okay, once that is successful, it will be redirected to the action method we are going to specify here. Okay, so let's copy the uh, this sample Facebook callback login, and we will rewrite the namings. Okay. I am doing just because most of the logics are same. And let's change this to Microsoft account login. Okay. And here also return URL will be our Blazor WebAssembly URL. And it will be Microsoft account. And here first line of code. This line of code is to know whether the external provider status is successful or not. So let's change this name to Microsoft defaults. Okay, so now it will get whether the authentication is successful or not. Okay, so if it is successful, what we are doing, we are fetching the clients from the authenticated cookie. Okay, but that authenticated cookie doesn't contains our required claim. So what we will do, we will recreate the authentication cookie by removing this existing cookie, and we will create new cookie with our information. So first thing what we are doing, we are getting the client's information like email, name. I will use given name. Okay, given name and surname. Okay, from the external provider, because initial authentication cookie is external provider, right? So we're getting that information. So in the manage external login user, this is a common method for all my external providers of this video series. Okay, this method is very simple. Okay, here first it will search for the user with email address and the external login. If it is present, it will return that user, or else it will store the user into our database. That means we are storing the external provider user information into our database so that we can create our own authentication cookie or claims for our user. Okay, so that is the use of this manage external login user. Okay, and next, after calling that method, what we are doing after this method, we are refreshing the external login. What is this refreshing external login means? With our database data, we are creating new claims. Okay, and here see HTTP context or sign out means I want to sign out from the existing cookie. I have mentioned, right, by default cookie is created where our callback method is executing, right? So that cookies I am removing, and again creating the authentication cookie with my own claims. Okay, so that is the refresh uh, external login method. Okay, and finally what we are doing, we are redirecting to our Blazor WebAssembly application with a query parameter external true. If it is true, then authentication is successful. If it is returning false, then authentication is not successful. Okay, let's save and jump into our Blazor WebAssembly application. And in the Blazor WebAssembly application, in the login.razor page, let's create one more link. Okay, that is for Microsoft account. Okay, and let's change this path, login path. So what is my new login path? And here I forgot to assign my callback method here. So please assign it. Microsoft login callback. Okay. And copy the path of this API and assign it here. Okay. That's it. Our implementation is done. Why our implementation is done? Because a core concept or core logics are implemented in video 1 and 2. So please do watch video 1 and 2 before watching this video. Okay, let's run our application and test Microsoft account authentication with our WebAssembly application. Okay, so let's run both API and Blazor WebAssembly applications. So click on the login page. Here you can see our Microsoft account, right? Click on it. So it is showing Outlook account, right? So try to log in. Give permission for email access. See here, I'm successfully logged in. Okay, and let's check my database whether my user is created or not. And one more small correction. Here, external provider name I have given wrongly. Please give like Microsoft. Because of that, account is created, Outlook account, but it is external login provider is stored as Facebook. So please correct it. Okay, otherwise we are good. My Outlook is successfully registered. Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome to Blazor WebAssembly Cookie Authentication series. So this is the last video of the series. In this video, we are going to enable Google Authentication for our Blazor WebAssembly. Okay. So let's jump into our code. So into our API project, we have to install a Google Authentication NuGet. Okay. Let's install it. Let's install Microsoft.ASP.NETCore.authentication.Google NuGet package. Okay, copy the package, install the package into our API project. Now we have to register our API project into Google Cloud Console. Okay, so go to console.cloud.google.com. Okay, so here you can see create a project, right? Click on it. First, we need to create a project. So let's name our project and create it. Okay, on project created successfully, we can see here in this drop down. Okay, and here we can search like API and services. Okay, okay, like this API services will be shown. Now go to auth consent screen. Okay, and now I can select like external where we can use personal Gmail account for login with our app and create. Okay, now here we need to specify the name for our app. I will specify like API auth. Okay, and you have to give support email. I am giving my support email. It is optional and all these are optional. And here also give your email address. Okay. Okay, next click on save and continue. Now in the scope section, click on add or remove scopes and select scopes like user email, profile and OpenID. Okay, and click on update. And our claims will be added because these claims will be provided by the Google authentication. Okay, to our app. Okay, and finally click on save and continue. Now here we have to add test users to authenticate with our app. This is for development mode. Okay, so what I will do, I will add my email ID. So only these IDs can be tested for authentication within our project. Okay, for production it will be different because all users should be allowed, right? We can add about 100 test emails here, users here. Okay, and click on save and continue. And here you can view the summary and click on back to dashboard. Okay, now let's go to credentials menu. Okay, in this credentials menu, click on create credentials. Okay, select Auth client ID. Okay, and here we are going to select web application and name of my client. Okay, so it is API only, right? Not WebAssembly application API. Okay, and here we need to add redirect URL. We know redirect URL, nothing but our API domain. So in the launch settings, copy this domain. Okay, and along with this, we need to specify redirect path like sign in Google. Okay, that is the default path. Sorry, not here. This is JavaScript. Control A. I need to add here authorized route. This is for JavaScript applications. Okay, mine is API, right? I will give here. Okay, let's create now. What we did here, just created, selected web application and given name API and added authorized redirect URI. Okay. Now click on create. Now here you can see client ID and client secret, right? We are going to use them in our application. Okay, first let's add Google settings into our API application. Okay. Okay. What we have? Client ID. Okay. What is my client ID? Copy and client secret. Okay. Client secret. Copy the client secret. Okay. Now let's register Google service in the program.cs file. So go to program.cs file. Similar to all other external logins, we have to register the Google service. Okay. Add Google. Okay. E dot client ID. Client secret. We have to configure here. So let's copy this line of code. Okay. For reading the settings from the JSON file. Now, as an appropriate setting names. Okay. So Google, and client ID, client secret. Okay. That's our service registration. Now let's jump into our AuthController and create action method for my Google login. So what I will do, here I will just copy this existing code. Okay. For my Google action method, Google login action method, we just modify the existing code. So it will be Google login and I will change the route. Okay, so this URL will be nothing but our Blazor WebAssembly domain. Okay, and we know challenge method will invoke the external login provider. So in our case, it should show the Google authentication page, login page, and here we need to specify the authentication scheme. So that is like Google defaults. Okay, dot authentication scheme, nothing but a normal constant value Google, and here I need to give the callback method because this challenge method will open the Google login page. Once the user is successfully logged in, it will redirect back to the action method that we are going to specify here. So that callback method also, I will remodify the existing one by duplicating it. Okay. So here, this is the callback method I want to use. So here what we are going to do, let's change the callback method name like Google login callback and change the route as well. And we know that return URL will be the Blazor WebAssembly domain. Okay, and here this first line of code to know whether our external login successful or not. Okay, so just change this name here like Google defaults. So it will identify whether the Google authentication is successful or not. Okay, if authentication is successful, we know that default cookie will be created, right? Once the external authentication is successful, our .NET framework automatically creates the cookie that we cannot control. But we are going to recreate a new cookie based on our required claims. So here what we are doing, here we are fetching email ID, claim name, and surname like the information that are from the Google, okay, that are created as a default cookie in the default cookie. Those claims are I am retrieving now. So in the manage external method, we are passing them, and this is the external provider login name. So change like Google. So in this method, what we are doing, let's explore. So this is a simple method. What we are doing, we are fetching the user information based on email and the external provider name. Means email for now Google. It will search like Google. So with that account, if any user exists, it will return. If not exist, then we are going to register them into our database. Okay, new if that is a new user, then we are going to register them into our database. So that is the purpose of this method. Okay, so that is the purpose of that method. Next, refreshing the cookie. So I have already mentioned by default, once the external authentication is success, our .NET will create a create authentication cookie with their claims, right, which we cannot control. But what we are doing here, we are again preparing all the necessary properties for creating authentication cookie. And here, if you see this line of code, I am signing out, means I am clearing the existing authentication cookie and creating a new authentication with cookie with my required claims. Okay. So if you observe here, user ID, I am explicitly adding into my claim. Okay. So that will be available me because I am creating a new authentication cookie. So that is the use of this refresh shining method. Okay. So after that, we are redirecting back to our Blazor WebAssembly with the external query parameter true means our authentication is successful. If the external auth query parameter false means our authentication is failed. Okay. So that's the logic we need to implement in this auth control. And majority of the logic has been implemented in the 1 and 2 videos. So before watching this video, it is mandatory to watch first video and the second video. Okay. Now finally, let's jump into our Blazor WebAssembly application. And one more small thing I forgot here, we need to assign callback method name. So Google callback method name should be provided here so that on successful Google authentication, uh, it will redirect to Google login callback action method. Okay. Now go to Blazor WebAssembly application. In the login.razor component, let's add one more external login link that is for Google. Okay. And let's change the login API path. So our login API path is google.login. Okay. Okay. Now let's run both API and the Blazor WebAssembly application. Okay. Here is my Blazor WebAssembly application. Click on login. See, here you can see Google, right? So click on for Google authentication. Now it's going to redirect to the Google login page we got, right? So login with our email ID we registered with the console. So those emails only will work for testing. Okay. Other than if you use any other email ID, it won't work. Okay. Because it is under testing, right? But our API is not yet deployed our projects. And provide password as well. Okay, some security. Let's allow this app to access. See, it is redirected back to our API project with external auth equal to true. And here you can see my Google information, that is my username. Okay, and you can see login button also coming. Okay, now that means our Google authentication with our Blazor WebAssembly application is successful. Now let's check our database whether my Google user is saved into my database or not. So here you can see my Google information is saved into my database. Okay, that means we are successfully authenticated with our external login provider, that is Google. So that's all, guys. This is the end of the Blazor WebAssembly authentication, cookie authentication. So in this series, we have discussed about initially first video, about the ASP.NET Core cookie, and next video Facebook authentication, and next Twitter authentication, and next Microsoft authentication, and finally in this video Google authentication. So that is the end of this series. Okay, I hope this video has delivered some useful information to you all. So if you like my video, please do support me by subscribing to my channel. Soon we are going to meet with new videos. Until then, signing off.